Okay, welcome everybody. I'm glad you could all join us for our ISBM webinar. You've joined the Institute for the Study of Business Markets, and our webinar today is Faster Revenue Growth enabled by new digital tools. You're really going to love these tools. And Eric Kurtz and Pat Kenny are going to be presenting this to us. Let me just tell you a little bit about how we work here. So first, you've joined ISBM. We were founded in 1982. We've been around a while, and we were founded by practitioners. There were several B2B companies that had recognized that the research in B2B marketing was very limited at the time. And they came to a university, which turned up to be Penn State, and said, what can we do together? And now we are nearly 40 member firms, learning from each other. And we have 29 academic fellows, which I'll show you a picture of later, from around the world. As well as 18 B2B instructors and partners that help us get better at B2B marketing as a group. Today, as I mentioned, Eric and Pat are presenting, and that's a lovely picture of me that I'm going to keep using because I think I still look better there than anything I've taken lately. And I'll let them introduce themselves when they get there, but thank you for joining us. So how do we interact? If you've never been part of our webinar, and I don't know where you've been if you haven't been using Zoom for the last 18 months, but we're going to use this tool called Q&A tab down. So down below, you should have a bar with a little Q&A word next to it. In this case, it looks like bubbles now. Maybe they've changed that. You're going to click on that at any moment that you get a thought that you want to ask a question. While you're on this webinar, you are visually and audioly muted, but please type your question at any time. And I'll be watching that window of questions, and I will field those questions to the presenters at the end of the presentation. If you're having questions about the work that the Zoom functionality and you have technical problems, feel free to send something in the Q&A or the chat window, which we're also monitoring. We'll make sure that everything's good. And then there's always the question is, can I get a copy of this later? And the answer is yes. So if you signed up for this webinar and you're using the link that was given to you, you'll also get an email afterward that tells you when the webinar is available for replay. And that's usually in 24 hours or so. And you can go to isbm.com and you'll be able to find that for the next 30 days. And afterward, after 30 days, if you're a member of ISBM, and we hope you are, then you can also go into B2B Pulse and find it there. So we hope if you missed it, one, you'll want to watch it again, but if you want to recommend it, feel free to do so. This is our leadership team, just in case you haven't met us. Again, my lovely picture there. Rand Mendez is my partner, and he works on the membership. Scott and Becky help with the curriculum. Stefan is our counterpart in the academic world, and he directs all of the academic research that we help fund at Penn State. Lori Nicolini actually does all of the work, and Ralph Oliva and Gary Lillian are our past directors that stay with us. Here's a kind of a smattering of the different faculty that we have as fellows from all the universities that are with us. They continue to do research. And if you're an ISBM member, you have the benefit of speaking with them if you have the need. Here is, again, just a bunch of logos that kind of indicate who our member firms are today. And then what's coming up. So what's coming up, if you are an ISBM member, you're going to want to make sure that you're signed up for the October 13th and 14th members meeting. This is a members only meeting. And unfortunately, we're still virtual. We had really hoped we could be hybrid and have some people get together, but just not yet. So you're going to want to join us for the Power Frameworks. We have a historical presentation that's recorded from Ralph Oliva that gives us a background of all the frameworks that we've been using in the B2B world. And then at this meeting, you'll be seeing two frameworks that have never existed before and how you can use them for digital as well as analytical tools. And you'll, again, want to join us. The other reason you might want to join us is that we're also going to have a real coffee break, even though it's kind of virtual. And we're going to send you a coffee mug and a coaster and coffee so you can have coffee break with us. And we're going to do a chocolate tasting, and we'll be sending you chocolate as well. So hopefully that will get you to come, if nothing else. October 28th, we have our Marketing Excellence Roundtable, and we'd love for you to join us for that. On November 3rd, we have a special jam session that is held by Dr. Ghislaine Gillette. She has been teaching for the last decade how to build trust with only audio. That is, you can take a call and you can get a new customer where you thought you had to do that in person. She's an amazing person. So that jam session is limited to 15 seats only because she's going to do some direct work with individuals. And there are a few seats left. So if you want to be part of that jam session, please get your seat by signing up. And then lastly, in November, we have a webinar, which is the 5 planks of door opening success. A woman that I met that is a phenomenal door opener. And she can guarantee you that if you've been looking to have a conversation with a particular person in a particular company and you can't seem to figure out how to get that done, she knows how. You're going to want to pay attention to that webinar. Again, anything that we've had in the past is recorded. You can find us at B2B Pulse. And I thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to pass this on to Eric and Pat, but I'll just again pop here that if you want to follow up afterward, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to email us. We'll put these up again so you can get to that. And let me take this over to Eric and Pat and let them share their slides. Thanks a lot, guys.
Okay.
All right.
Yes. Thank you, Lynn, for the introduction, and thank you for letting Eric and I speak today. Today's topic is about revenue growth or revenue acceleration. And we're making a big assumption, but perhaps not big. That's really what most B2B companies want. The pandemic has certainly created some unusual situations with revenue and supply and supply chain and other logistics challenges. We all remember the lumber situation earlier this year. You know, the automotive industry is challenged with chips, and one of my personal favorites, chicken wings, is in short supply. But nonetheless, it's most CEOs and most companies really are focused on revenue growth coming within and during and once we get beyond the pandemic. You don't hear many say, well, we plan to shrink over the next 5 years. So let's accept that revenue growth is going to be important as a leading indicator and objective for companies. Let me introduce myself briefly. I'm Pat Kenny. I finished a 40-year sales and marketing career at PPG Industries and at Vitro Architectural Glass. Some of my roles were VP of marketing for both companies, where I led all the marketing activities. And then in May of 2020, I retired and started a boutique consulting firm called Value Engineering. And really the name says it all. It's been my experience, it's very easy to take value out of your value propositions, and it's much harder to put it back in. So our focus is to help companies improve their value propositions. I'm going to take and talk about the importance of value, the first 8 slides. Then I'm going to turn it over to my co-speaker, Eric Pers, who will talk about some case studies for your consideration, some of the digital tools that are that are new to B2B, relatively new, and then share a digital tool that he's developed about marketing ROI. Okay, next slide, please. So again, if you have questions, please go to the Q&A and let Lynn moderate that at the end. If we don't answer all your questions, Eric and I are happy to go offline and trade emails or jump on a call if you'd like. And we are planning to save like 10 minutes or so, ideally at the end. So without further ado, let's jump in. So the big question, why focus on B2B customer value? I guess it's my contention that customer value is the bedrock of sustainable growth. There's no other organizational initiative that can directly drive revenues and margin and market share and new customer acquisition, et cetera, more than your customer value. And, you know, B2B customers at the end of the day, they buy on perceived value that they get from your company, and they'll define your value proposition. And I guess regardless of your position as a supplier, whether you're the president or frontline salesperson, if you don't or can't or won't articulate your value proposition, then it's an absolute truism that your customers will. But the challenge with that is your customers may get it wrong, and they may undervalue and are likely to undervalue your value proposition. And if they do that, then you could face a little bit more price pressure than you want. So I guess the question, if value proposition is so important, why do so many companies minimize their focus on it? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I think a lot of companies, most successful B2B companies, have a strong and compelling differentiated value proposition at some point in their corporate lives, but they tend to weaken. So let me talk about some of the factors that drive it and see if they resonate with you. The first one on the left side, unclear ownership within the firm. So who owns the value proposition? Marketing, sales, quality, the executive team, everyone. And that is easy to say, but sometimes it's very hard to really understand who leads the charge and who carries the mantle for the value proposition. And if you work in a large company, you'll invariably see organizational people changes. You get a new divisional president who comes in, and we're now going to focus on cost, and that has a boomerang effect on the value you deliver to customers, and that happens with some regularity. You get non-aligned functional priorities. You could get a very well-intentioned supply chain leader that says, hey, we're going to reduce our working capital. We're going to lean out our inventories. Absolutely important to the success of any company. But all of a sudden, that leads to stockouts for the customers. And that creates a lessening of the value proposition. And then the other internal challenge is just measuring value. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. On the external side, your customers' needs are changing, and particularly with the pandemic, the value of on-time delivery has gone up considerably. The decision makers change at your customers. That's not a controllable event. You have to adapt and deal with the purchasing, the manufacturing, the executive team that you can with, and sometimes they're not focused on supplier relationships. And then finally, there's those pesky, bothersome competitors that always want to take your customers. They want to take your share. They want to launch their products and capture more of the profit pool from yours. So you have a lot of factors that tend to weaken your value proposition. And I guess as I would pose this question, maybe you'd want to ask this: which of these factors are weakening your value proposition today? And perhaps what should you do about it? Okay, next slide, please, Eric. And so just our experience and some of the research we've looked at over the years is, customer value has three elements and three types of benefits. And I'll start on the left side with the currency. It's hard to measure the value in currency, but it needs to be done. You can't really get away in today's world with saying, well, that customer loves us. Well, that may be true, but he may love another supplier more. So I mentioned the value of on-time delivery. 2 years ago, delivering oxygen to a hospital might have been, well, we'll get it to you next week. That might have been good enough, might have been perfectly acceptable. Today, that probably is, we need that oxygen tomorrow at 6 a.m. and no ifs and buts. So the value drivers change over time, but you have to measure what's that worth into your value proposition. The functional and economic benefits, they're both tangible and less tangible, but it's the revenue growth, the cost avoidance, and the different value buckets. What are the benefits that your company really provides? And then finally, this on the left side, the next best alternatives. Most customers have alternatives in the marketplace. One exception I thought of this morning was the automotive industry. They would love to get a replacement for their chips. I don't think they've found them. That's a real constraint for a $25 chip when you can't sell a $40,000 car. So they're always looking at next best alternatives, and that's your value has to be grounded in that. On the right side, and this is worthy of just a whole ISBM discussion and seminar by itself, is just the benefits. But most companies do a pretty good job of explaining to customers what the functional benefits are. This half-inch drill will drill a half-inch hole. But when you get to the next level down, this economic benefit, that becomes more problematic. It's more challenging. Some companies are extremely crisp at this exercise. Others are a little bit less. But it's monetizing your value and at least going in with a proof point and a discussion that you can have with your customers about your value. You don't always land on the exact agreement, but you have to have the conversation. And then finally, relationships, in my experience, they tend to be over or undervalued. Strong relationships with customers, they solve problems. And most customer loyalty research really has indicated that problem solving as much as you don't want to get into a serious problem, that could drive 40, 30, 40, 50% of the customer relationship value and the customer loyalty. So those relationships that exist across different entities and functions between the supplier and the customer are extremely important, and they do have value, and customers recognize them. Okay, next slide, please. You know, we could talk about customer-driven value, and I would just say I've been working with value propositions for 28 years now with PPG. They had 12 different divisions I worked with Vitro, with some of my clients in the consulting world. I've probably been exposed or involved with 40 value propositions, and it's tough work. It's tough work, and it's tough work because it really requires an organizational mindset that will have an intense and ongoing market perspective. It's not doing a customer sat survey once a year. It's engaging with the customers and really the channel influencers, which may be beyond the customers, and really understanding the customer and the ecosystem and what's driving it, what's valued today and what's going to be valued tomorrow. So it's trained resources, it's skilled listeners, it's people that can ask the what ifs and be the challengers, and can help wrestle out the customer's unmet needs. It's easy to understand, oh, I need this type of product quality, or I need it, you know, every Tuesday at 5 o'clock, it needs to be delivered. That's pretty easy, but really getting to deep substantive value drivers is hard work. And you need a process. This can't be a casual experience. You know, it's customer focus week. This needs to be an ongoing organizational imperative. So you need a process of how you're going to measure and improve your value on a regular basis. And then finally, and maybe the toughest one, is it requires organizational courage. Someone has to be able to stand up and say at the leadership meeting, our value proposition is not as strong, it's not compelling, and it must change. And that's a tough conversation. It doesn't happen enough. It's what companies need to hear, but they have trouble listening to. And I think certainly I have been in meetings where you get the big traumatic event. We just lost our second largest customer. Why'd we lose them? Well, we didn't do this, and that. And you know, you hate to be in that situation, because that's a failure of the value delivery mechanism and a failure to understand the customer's requirements. So there's a lot. This is not an easy task. I recognize and encourage you to, you know, always redouble your efforts when you're talking about customer value. Next, please. There's a lot of different ways to measure value. And I think they're all important. I'm not going to pick any single one. I think they should all be in your marketing toolbox when you think about your marketing ROI. You know, revenue growth, there's a lot of different ways to measure that, with new products and segment growth and margin by product or by SKU or by customer, share of wallet, new product launches, your brand. I neglected a few obvious ones: customer satisfaction, loyalty, customer retention. Those you could add. They're all important. And, you know, I think the point here is you should be picking from a number of these and using them to really understand and help define your marketing ROI, which is really a reflection of your customer value delivered. But there's limitations with these measures. They don't sometimes measure the influencer impact. An architect's going to specify a building product. That's important, but it's hard to measure. They don't measure the ecosystem impact. Some are lagging indicators. They lag by 6 months or a year, and some aren't aligned with macro trends or other, you know, activities your firm's doing. Sometimes they don't measure customer win rates or the amount of new calls coming in. Some of those. So I think today's toolbox requires all of these, but also some new ones that Eric's going to talk about. I have one slide left, but these digital tools can really help you understand customers and markets and opportunities faster, and help you develop your ways to measure value to put more opportunities in front of the company. Okay, last slide. Thank you, Eric. Yeah, this is a framework that I call it managing value, and it can be complicated. You know, at PPG, we identified 18 marketing competencies, or tactics, you might think of them, that we needed internally or within our marketing supplier base. And really, if you think about these tactics, doing market research or segmentation, those are inputs or tactics, but the output is the value you do to a customer. And I can tell you, it's easy to get lost in the marketing forest. You can get lost in all these different activities. And so we use this framework in value engineering, and I used it at PPG. I introduced it in 2006, but I want to give full credit to ISBM. They were the early developers of this. The initial framework came out of ISBM. I modified it, tweaked it over time, but full credit to ISBM. It's been an excellent tool. But the simplicity really starts with the questions. So if you start in the upper left corner, and if you really answer them truthfully, I think you can help understand where you have value gaps in your offering. And if I want to link some of those, like confirming value, to some of those tactics or capabilities or competencies that I talked about that most B2B companies need: industry analysis, customer segmentation, profitability analysis, market analysis. Where are you going to find new value and growth in your market segments and customers? And there's a lot of different tools you can use. And if you go over to the upper right, the create value, then you think about new products. But as we all know, products are great, but services are just as important, maybe more critically important. So where can you offer new services and new channel initiatives and new programs for innovation? Where do you create value in the ecosystem? And when you get to communication, it's not just about asking how well your sales team can effectively communicate the value. It's really talking about the brand and your marketing communications, your industry communications, your organizational communications, certainly as well as your sales force. You want to be sure that you have the right touch points, the right messaging across your organization to either to your targeted customers or your markets. And then finally is, how do you get paid? And how do you capture the value? And it's really about, are you getting price premiums? Do you get a share premium? Do you get a share of wallet at the customer? Do you get customer retentions, have less acquisition costs? So all of these quadrants have served me well for 15 years in this kind of what I would call this value delivery model, because it really takes the mystery out of some of the marketing confusion and focuses on a common language that resonates, whether you're in the executive team or the purchasing or supply chain or quality or manufacturing. They understand these. It was always very easy to get out of the marketing forest and into the value conversation because they do understand customers buy on value. So anyway, I hope that's a tool that you can use. We're going to shift gears. I'm very privileged to introduce Eric Pers. He's the VP for data science at Brunner. And I think you're going to enjoy Eric's talk and some of the tools and models he's got to show. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Pat. So just as Pat said, I lead the data science practice at Brunner. We're a full service marketing agency here in Pittsburgh and as well in Atlanta. We kind of position ourselves as an agency sort of helping challenger brands change and compete. And often that's with the help of leveraging their own data to create competitive advantages. And we're gonna talk a lot about that today. So I've been in the agency space for about 10 years. Also spent some time in financial services and management consulting. And actually going all the way back, my background's in mechanical engineering. So this first page here, it's a busy one, but it's kind of the way I always like to introduce my group's work to clients and prospects. And it's kind of remarkable how tightly it maps back to Pat's framework he just went over with the 4 C's. So we kind of put the same, labels in those arrows in the quadrants there. It's not by design. It's really just kind of reflective of the work we're doing, addressing business needs. So let's start in the upper left, confirming value and market opportunity assessment. So we use statistical techniques to rank different markets. That could be DMAs, it could be trade areas, what have you, for marketing and really operational prioritization. And that's done through our clients' first-party data, but also a lot of third-party data we can overlay to kind of create those rankings and then develop a strategy from there. Going clockwise, CRM analytics. So your customer data is powerful, especially the behavioral data. You can use it to build segments, predict needs and personalize, and a lot of other value-adding processes using data that you already have. Text analytics is in the lower right, so that I use interchangeably with NLP, natural language processing, which you might hear me use. So I just mean the same thing, text analytics, NLP. Think about your call transcripts, your chat transcripts, your product reviews. That's all consumer points of view that's very valuable, but it is not very well organized typically. But that's okay. There are tools out there for extracting value at scale from all that unstructured data. And last but not least, on the lower left is marketing ROI. So that is all about the incrementality of marketing. So what's working and what's not? What are we getting back? Is it worth it? And how is marketing driving the business? That's probably 50–60% of the work we do. And again, it's really answering the big questions that CMOs and other leadership have. Okay.
Hey, Eric, Pat,
Yeah.
there was a request from the audience if you can speak a little louder or closer to the microphone. They were having a little trouble hearing you.
Sorry about that. I'll do my best to project. So if the techniques or projects I sort of just outlined in the last page feel a little daunting, you're not alone. But I just wanted to share this real true timeline with a client that was feeling that same way in summer of 2020. And they've kind of gone on this journey with us over the last year to really already extracting a lot of value from their data. So this is a plumbing supply manufacturer. They make pipe fittings and other plumbing supplies that are sold in big box stores and other places. Back in July, we just had a kickoff conversation, just about what our goals and objectives were the next month in August. We were meeting with IT teams and marketing teams to do an audit and discuss how data would move from point A to point B. By October, we collected all historical marketing data, processed it, did the Q&A, and had it sort of flowing in an automated fashion. And in November, we did the same thing with their retail partner data. Think big box stores mostly. And that data isn't always formatted the same way or it's clean. So there's some due diligence and work that has to be done there, but it doesn't take maybe as long as you think. And then by January, we had incorporated contextual data. So housing starts, extreme weather, which affects their business, other relevant data points that add context to the story of what's going on. So sales, retail sales, their marketing and context. And then by February, we had sort of a dashboard that got everyone speaking the same language, looking at these metrics and seeing how they're moving. By March, we'd already prepared 3 SOWs, which fit in the categories we just talked about. And now we're in September, and they've already gotten results on their marketing ROI. So this is a group that now knows for every dollar they put into working media, what is the net profit that comes back on that, which you can imagine is a valuable thing to know for a CMO or any anyone really, any business leader to kind of make business cases and to grow their business. So we have 3 case studies I'm going to quickly walk through. I hope that they give you some even more tangible feel for the kinds of projects that roll up to these frameworks. Confirming value in this case, this was what we would call market opportunity assessment for a HVAC manufacturer. They're a national brand that is obviously looking to grow their business, and they have a limited budget for marketing and other related efforts to grow. And they work through a installer network of contractors across the country that are regional, depending on where you are. There's a high variability in their capacity to serve and their experience in installing these units. So you have kind of a lot of variables here. And what they wanted to do is prioritize markets. So we went and we took first party data that would be I would call demand proxy. So their leads, looking at that historically, looking at the seasonality of it, as well as their installer network and firmographics about them. We overlaid third-party data. So we have a lot of geospatial, really granular data we get from either Alteryx, which is a service we use, but also site crawling to get data like housing starts, things like that. So we end up with hundreds, literally hundreds of variables, and in the analysis approach, we go through processes to reduce that down, boil it down to insights that by region or by DMA that are actionable, and then overlay that installer network lens to it to get at market rankings. So we have a market opportunity determined by all those data points just described, and then we know this manufacturer's ability to their installer network's capacity to actually serve those markets, and we end up with a ranking from that. So when we went to market with this, we quickly were able to boost leads 30% year over year. Actually, we built a web app that they could go in and really dig deep and drill down into performance metrics and look even at do some research on their own contractor network and how they are either could be under or over serving different areas. But then it was just since we were able to select markets where media might be cheaper based on this ranking system, we could kind of cherry pick the markets where media isn't as expensive. Toledo is a good example. You don't necessarily think of marketing Toledo, but it kind of bubbled up as a priority market. And we went with a strategy to make the most of their budget. It really worked for them. This case study here is getting into the text analytics or natural language processing for a pharmaceutical client. Their objective was much different. It was all about M&A due diligence. So they wanted to evaluate healthcare companies and understand the lay of the land in the marketplace and see where funding is going, so they could design programs for their outreach for engaging with companies for M&A discussions or technology sharing, things like that. So they purchased two proprietary databases of healthcare companies. Firmographics, right? So size of the company, location, a few high-level data points, but they also included their URLs, which was really how we went about truly understanding the companies that were in these databases. So we went and we wrote code that went and crawled all of these URLs responsibly and pulled information, about its pages, the founders, the home pages, et cetera, and had this massive amount of text data that we then processed and cleaned it and went through all this, necessary work that has to be done to raw text data. But through our algorithms, our NLP algorithms, we kind of distilled it all into, okay, we know these are healthcare related industries, but what about them? Where's the funding going? And the results were pretty interesting. You can see in that graphic on the right, we kind of told them where these different companies played in the healthcare space, right? They knew it was healthcare, but they weren't sure what that looked like beyond that category. That high level category definition. So you can see there's cancer treatment companies, there's medical devices and pharma, but even on the other side, there's software companies, there are companies producing like natural supplements, right, and CPG products. So, and then from the analysis, we also pulled in the funding that these small and mid-sized companies were getting, and that helped this company really, as opposed to like a spray and pray approach to marketing, get really focused on the areas of marketplaces they wanted to approach. And because part of this process brings the keywords, the relevant terminology used by these sub-industries, they could design their marketing outreach, material and write things in such a way that's relevant to them. So that really helped them actually improve response rate to their outreach materials and increase participation in this M&A program. But again, also got new ideas flowing as they got more information about different healthcare and life science industries. Last one here. This is a marketing ROI case study for a utility provider. This is for their commercial business specifically. Though in this case, it's not revenue they were after, at least not directly. They were after increasing awareness among business owners or businesses in their footprint, which was it was a big footprint in the Northeast United States about their energy efficiency programs. And once they got more participation and awareness for that, they were able to get government funding to kind of further those programs and increase their business. So we wanted to understand ROI for awareness growth across all the different channels they had in the marketplace. And so with the data we needed for that, we had their KPI, which was a survey they launched, which was continuously running, asking businesses about their awareness of their programs. And we rolled in or overlaid third-party data, which we had like controlling factors, right? Weather, which affects, which might affect awareness of these programs, macroeconomic conditions, seasonality, things like that. So we had the data, looking at the analysis approach section, the data was pretty busy. We did some smoothing techniques, tried different things to make sure that we kind of found the signal within the noise of the survey data, and then looked at time series models to find those cause and effect relationships between marketing expenditure, impressions, what have you, and awareness changes, either instantaneously or down the line. And then we looped those models. Once we got a sort of I'd say a firm construct of a model in place, we looped them through all their different regions to get a granular marketing strategy. So in the end, they had ROI measured by channel, dollars per point of awareness, and then we're able to change their budgets in the lagging markets to boost awareness to reach thresholds where then they were able to make a successful case for government media funding. So those were the three quick case studies. Kind of touched a little bit on, you can imagine, instead of awareness, that could be, that same modeling approach can be aimed at revenue or market share, whatever's captured. And this brings me to the whole idea of needing to find a data point that reflects how marketing might be affecting the audiences you're talking to. And we have this degree of separation. It could be 1-2 degrees that B2B brands tend to have between what they produce and the end user. And this section here is all about addressing that, because we need that, we need that dependent variable, which is tied to the consumer. And I worked a lot in the tire space, and so I always think of tires. This is a classic example where we have clients that they don't necessarily have that end revenue at the consumer level, so that they're the manufacturer and they're out there marketing. We've all seen ads from Goodyear and Michelin and Firestone, but they then send them to a distribution center or wholesaler, and then they get to the retail outlets or e-commerce like Tire Rack, where then consumers buy them, put them on their cars, and actually use the product. So my advice here is to push to get retailer sales. As a supplier, you who is spending money on marketing, you have the argument that you're helping them too, right? You're helping grow their revenues as well, and you want to make it better. So that if that argument isn't enough, engage with them, see what arrangements can be made to get this valuable data, starting with the largest retailers and working your way down. But if not, if that's not a possibility, we've worked actually with some clients who use proxies for demand, and some of them can be pretty effective and tightly tied to revenue. So you could launch, it says omnibus studies down there at the bottom. Those are basically just short surveys, maybe 1-2 questions where you can get some information about the respondent, but also, did you purchase tires in the last quarter, and if so, which brand did you purchase? And you can start to get a feel for market share and those dynamics and how they're changing. So there are affordable survey solutions to that. You could look at if your brand is talked about in social media, you can look at changes in that volume, how often people are searching your brand. Is there a dealer locator on your site that might be a leading indicator of sales, depending on how much you see usage in a dealer locator, things like that. So it's kind of it's working to get a data point that everyone's comfortable has some reflection of the consumer behavior that we're trying to influence. So I like this slide. It's valuable because it's kind of a complete list of marketing ROI techniques that are available to you. As you go from the bottom up in this page, the degree of difficulty increases, as well as we tend to see firms' data analytics maturity kind of increase as you go from the bottom up, but they're all potentially useful tools. We'll start at the bottom with reporting. It's technically not necessarily an ROI tool, but it is hugely important because it forces brands, like we discussed earlier with the plumbing supply company, to harness their data, correct issues with the data, and get everyone speaking the same language about what's an important metric for the business, and then start observing it and looking for, do you see relationships between things we're doing and changes in those numbers. So reporting is really hugely important. That's why it's kind of the biggest box there. It gets a lot of value, which it's relatively straightforward to implement. There are always challenges with reporting, but it's a great starting point and is usually achievable. And then next up is just testing, whether it's A/B or multivariate testing. Change something and see what happens, right? And you can do techniques. You can use statistical techniques to create really good test control groups, but it's a great way to get a quick read on ROI. Multi-touch attribution, it's frankly, with the change in cookie policies and laws, is a bit of a dying thing. But there are some scenarios, situations where it's still a relevant conversation. But what I see a lot of the more advanced ROI analyses going to is more towards like what I call at a high level time series modeling. What's shown here is econometric modeling and marketing mix are really two sides of the same coin, I think. One taking a shorter term view, looking at maybe greater detail, and then marketing mix, which tends to take a longer term view and incorporate more slow moving metrics that might affect your business, like, whether that's climate or unemployment, things like that, or inventory trends, things like that, that might take a longer time to affect the business. Regardless, these sort of techniques have been really helpful for us to understand, and as we change inputs in marketing or pricing or something like that, what's using statistics and machine learning at the other end, what do we expect to see? How well can we predict our KPIs changes? On top of all that is Explainable AI. This is fairly new. We work with a couple clients in it. I really like to get the marketing mix or some of the other testing insights and processes flowing before we go into something such as that. But it's been really fascinating to see how this tool is able to derive insight about what creative execution might be working, or what, very detailed, very actionable, granular insights are sort of opened up by this technique, because it can handle such wide, we call it wide data sets, right? Very detailed data sets. So you might be wondering, what is the time frame to accomplish some of these things? It does vary depending on the state of your data. But once the data is in a good place, it's generally measured in weeks, not quarters. You can see ranges here from as low as 2 weeks to a quick time series model to 12 weeks to get a good AI model read out on it. Testing can take a long time depending on what you're trying to accomplish, but for the most part, you should have expectations that these kinds of analyses, again, once the data, I think, is in a good spot, to take single digit numbers of weeks. So after this, I think tomorrow you'll be receiving an email. We created a quick, if you're so interested, 5-minute questionnaire where you can answer, I think it's 12, 14 questions about your marketing data and some of your other data as well, and just quick multiple choice responses. And then what it does is kind of gives you an assessment of where you stand with your ability to take on some of those marketing ROI projects I just discussed, and hopefully gives you some good concrete next steps for how to get to that next level, up that degree of difficulty ladder in that last slide. Okay.
Well, thanks, Eric, for sharing quickly sharing some of those really powerful tools that are in the marketplace today. I guess I'll make a couple comments on the first couple bullets, but I hope that I've made the case that managing your value is absolutely imperative. It's frankly one of your company's most important assets. It may not be on the balance sheet, but don't mistake it. Your customer value determines your future prosperity. And it's not easy, but hopefully the framework, which again, give credit to ISBM for developing a long time ago, the 4C framework, that you can break the marketing challenges and the task into not easily, but digestible quadrants, where you can confirm or create or communicate or capture value, provide some value for as you think about your company's value proposition. And managing and confirming your value it's like the rest of the world we live in. It speeds up. It requires better tools, newer tools, and faster analytics. Understanding changes in markets and customers has never been more important. And I think the pandemic again has really demonstrated the companies that were adept at that and the companies that maybe took it for granted. So really think about value would be my parting comments. Eric?
Yeah, so we looked at 3 case studies plus the example of the plumbing supply company getting its data in order. That a lot of mid-size and large and mid-size, even some small B2B companies are pushing analytics and pushing their data to give them a leg up. So we see that a lot, more and more on the agency side too. B2B clients following what had been traditionally associated with like sort of B2C businesses. It's possible to answer these tough questions for B2B companies as well. And then it's what used to be a sticker shock of a project that took half a year. That's really falling apart. It's these solutions to analyze data and get really valuable insights are not necessarily as long and expensive as you think.
Great. Are you guys ready for some questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, first one is for Eric. And so if we go back to your pharma case study, when and why does it make sense to engage a provider like Brunner for a bespoke analysis versus like working with an ABM or an intent data provider?
Well, we had been working with them on some of their content creation. And so the conversation was natural is, how do we, and some of their marketing outreach, I should say as well. And the question was pretty natural, like, how do we rethink, the strategy we have and the approach we're taking to basically approaching these companies. And they said, well, we have a database of companies that we kind of poke at and filter once in a while to look at things. And we said, well, we could analyze all of that text at scale in basically one pretty quick project. So it was just kind of being there at the we were there helping them with content and strategy for marketing. And when the conversation turned to data, and we kind of took the opportunity and said, we have really strong natural language processing capabilities in house, and we could, since we're already working with you, we can move quick.
Okay. Back to the value proposition. So sometimes value propositions feel like you need to be a poet, or your writing skills are being tested. Can you share some insights on creating like really good value propositions?
Yeah, well, Lynn, I'll take a shot at that one. Yeah, I think a lot of times what, and I've sat in some rooms where we've gotten the blank pad boards out and, okay, let's really talk about it. And, I think it's a natural inclination, but you always think of internally. We do this, we do this, we do this. And I think you always have to take the perspective, what does it do for the customer? and really, is it meaningful for the customer? And would they say, yeah? Would they nod their head and say, yeah, if you take that away, I'm going to miss it? And so I think having a customer perspective, an honest and realistic one, really is the starting point for crafting, I think, good and strong value propositions, as well as a recognition of what the competitors are doing. Because I think, and I certainly have learned this through prior ISBM seminars, differentiated, compelling value propositions. They need to have relevance and meaning for the customer, but they also have to be different from the competitors. So, I mean, that's the sweet spot. Not easy to get to, but that's the optimal place to be. But that takes usually a very big cross-functional group, and frankly, after you're done with that internal exercise, it should be pressure tested a little bit with hopefully some of your friendly customers that are willing to acknowledge and say, yeah, that is important and that is meaningful. So that'd be my suggestion. Keep the customer perspective always in front of you.
Yeah. How do you involve your salespeople in that process?
Yeah, I think it's got to be collaborative. They're the listening post, and they're hearing things. So there's got to be a process that where when customer says, boy, if you could do this, that has to get back to the organization, because if one customer is suggesting that or asking for it, that could be a widespread, and that could be a value differentiator. So having them trained to be adept at not just communicating the value and selling the company's products and services, but having that listing post and feeding it back is important. And then, of course, with sales leadership, you're constantly not only talking about the customers, but the ecosystem. Are there other influencers that are making decisions? We all know you can call on, I don't know, General Motors purchasing person, but there may be the designer is just as important. He wants better car, different finishes on the car, different material in the seats or dashboard material. So there's always a lot more influencers, I think, in a company, and having that salesperson reach beyond the traditional purchasing is critical to have those conversations.
And that just made me think of that. You've just taken me to another place, which is, are there different value propositions then for the influencer versus the actual buyer when you have these complicated companies?
Yeah, I think very much so. And I think I've seen companies kind of write out different personas of the buying influencers, and they can be stereotypical and things like that. But I do think if you think about what a designer requires and needs versus purchasing versus the factory manager in terms of quality or PPM per million, yeah, I think there's very much some differences. And I think the successful companies understand those different touch points and craft their, or at least are able to articulate their different value propositions for those companies. But at the end of the day, it all has to kind of aggregate into, here's what we're doing for your company, and here's why we're helping you succeed.
Right.
I'd like to chime in real quick, if I might, on involving the sales teams too. That's when we're looking at analyses that explain revenue, capturing their behavior, whether it's conversations, phone calls, when they happen, how long they were, the nature of the conversation, those things, actually capturing that data could be really valuable in understanding how it might influence sales. So, we wouldn't want to do an analysis that wrongly attributes revenue to something else because we were missing that data. So that's always been a kind of a difficult list for companies, but to the extent that it's possible, I would always recommend just at least capturing basic metrics on sales teams, conversations, and engagements.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. It reminds me of my automotive days when, we would tell the buyer that we're going to save them a whole lot of production time and money, and they don't care because it's the price of the product that matters for them, right? But anyway, frustration there. I have another question. So if we're just getting started with data analytics, what's the best way to start measuring the value of our marketing?
Yeah, if you're just getting started, beyond starting to collect the data and putting it into sort of a centralized repository, like a BI platform, there's a number of those out there, by the way, to vet. I always like testing, right? Especially if you have a footprint where you can kind of compare similar markets one to the other. A simple test by, whether it's turning off marketing someplace or turning a different channel on somewhere else and just seeing what happens is really a good way to get a feel for how well marketing is doing or what a given channel is doing quickly. The only downside to that is it's hard to test a lot of things at once. It gets really complicated. You gotta be careful about cross-market contamination. It's really easy to do if you're testing email or direct mail or something that's a one-to-one communication where you can just do random holdouts. But if you're testing broadcast media, you have to think about marketplaces and how you can group them to get a good apples to apples read. And that all can be done. We've done that quite a lot. And again, depending on the sales cycle of your product or products, that could be, done in just a few weeks.
Mm-hmm. I'll come back to that in a second. We just had another question come in I want to make sure we have time for. So isn't it advantageous to focus on the what or the why you do business for your USPs versus the tools you use in the business? For instance, first party data isn't necessarily a USP. However, the quality of the data is the USP as far as what it does for the customer.
Is that for me? Can you define USPs?
Haley, do you want to help me out with your
is that unique selling propositions? I don't know. I'm just guessing.
It would be something you guys use as a phrase, but no. Let's see if she's typing for us. Correct. That is correct. Unique selling proposition.
Sorry, and can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Sure. Isn't it advantageous to focus on the what or the why you do business for your unique selling propositions versus the tools you use in your business? For instance, first party data isn't necessarily a unique selling proposition. However, the quality of the data is the USB as far as what it does for the customer.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm going to be tangential to this in my answer, but certainly I don't, I did focus a lot on the channel of the marketing that would be delivering the message for the USB, but it's not necessarily always the case that the channel is most important. It could be the USB, or it could be some story that is told to get that point across, whether it's a sequence of communication. So certainly it gets much more complicated if you want to look at a sort of multi-channel interaction effect, but it's all doable. And again, or if you want to break the data out by the message or the content of the data, we do that quite a bit too, and look for whether that is moving the needle for revenue. It's a good point.
And so I'll just go back to something that you made me think about. So we've just had 18 months of weird data, right, with this pandemic. Is there anything we can do with this time that we can data mine that would be helpful to us?
Yeah, in fact, a lot of my clients had experienced that. And if you can find data that explains the weirdness, and I know I've managed to do this with my clients. In one case, it was, I think it was initial jobless claims data, right? So that data is freely available from the Fed. You go out there and it actually accounts for that weirdness variability that was seen from a modeling perspective, right? It explains the ups and downs even in a weird period. And then once you've controlled for that with that data, that's the beauty of these models, is that they can then explain weirdness or normalcy. And then all the other ups and downs can be attributed back to maybe something that's been in place the whole time beforehand or afterwards. So it's, I haven't come across a situation where I've been forced to throw away pandemic data, which isn't to say it doesn't exist, it's not out there. But I think with enough digging, you should be able to find, some explanatory variable out there.
Almost like the accidental experiment is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And we've seen for some clients channels that a model might explain 3-4 years of history, but it's good enough to explain the pandemic period. And we've seen some channels that were valuable and messages that were valuable for clients before it hit. You can see it happen in real time in the data that all flipped, and now they need to be focusing in different areas because of the way people's lives have changed.
Fascinating. Well, thanks a lot, fellas. I'm really, really glad you could join us. I'll remind everyone that they'll get a link to this so they can listen again, and they can forward it to others. But we've left their phone numbers up and their email addresses. You can feel free to reach out directly if you have further questions or want to talk further. And I encourage y'all to go visit isbm.com and register for our next event. And thank you again, gentlemen, for being with us.
Thank you, Lynn. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you so much.
Thanks for everybody who joined us too.
Thanks, everyone. Yep.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.